The Hollywood Sickness, Abercrombie and Fitch, the lawsuit. Hello, I'm H.G. Tudor. A civil lawsuit was filed last year by David Bradbury. He did this in his own individual capacity and also did as part of a class action complaint against Abercrombie and Fitch, Michael Jeffries, its former CEO, Matthew Smith, Jeffries' partner, and the Jeffries Family Office, an LLC. The content of this lawsuit is particularly interesting with regard to what is alleged, as it provides you with insight into the way that a certain type of narcissist will behave. It's also of interest given the allegations that have been made against P. Diddy also, because there are similarities in the dynamic. It enables you to see the way that a narcissist is attracted to a particular environment, here the corporate environment, to enable him to engage in behaviours which allow him to control people, draw fuel from them by way of response, and to enable him to obtain character traits and residual benefits. Here, the significant residual benefit was the pleasure of having sex with certain individuals. There are a variety of ways that Michael Jeffries went about this. One was promised gain, a standard manipulation used by the narcissist to offer something with the expectation that that will cause compliance on the part of the recipient. Whether the gain is actually given is another matter altogether. But here, Michael Jeffries, using his position as the CEO of Abercrombie and Fitch, utilised that to induce gullible young men to enter into sexual activity with him and others in order to gain what he wanted by suggesting to individuals that they would get a modelling contract with Abercrombie and Fitch. Furthermore, there was threatened loss, which was to suggest that if they did not go along with it, or if they spoke of what they had seen, that they would suffer such financial and reputational loss that it would in effect destroy their lives. Thus there's use of threat and threatened loss. It's also the case that Michael Jeffries was a wealthy man, or is a wealthy man, and had access not only to significant personal wealth, but also the corporate wealth of Abercrombie and Fitch, which he treated as his own personal war chest to engage in behaviours that enabled him to pay for accommodation, to pay for flights, to pay for security, to pay hush money, to cause people to do what he wanted. And this resulted in a significant orchestrated scheme where his own particular desires and wants were met by him utilising human beings as objects. The scale of the endeavour is most interesting, and I'm going to take you through the nature of the lawsuit to enable you to understand what is alleged, but also what that means in terms of Jeffries' narcissism and the narcissistic dynamic. It enables you to get a deeper understanding of the way that a narcissist behaves, but also to understand the scale and extent of the behaviours. The lawsuit is aimed at Abercrombie and Fitch as a consequence of maintaining that they had a participation in a widespread sex trafficking operation led by its CEO, Michael Jeffries. Jeffries has been described as a man who just never stopped working for the brand, thinking for the brand. He's even been referred to as the heart and soul of Abercrombie. That was the case from the time that he conceptualized the over-sexualization of young men to catapult the Abercrombie brand into success. Thus, he used over-sexualization and lack of boundary recognition to achieve success. And it remained the case when he used his role as CEO of Abercrombie to prey upon attractive young men who believed that Jeffries was going to hire them as an Abercrombie model, promised gain, the pinnacle of the modelling industry for men during the relevant time period. Jeffries was so important to the profitability of the brand that he was given complete autonomy to perform his role as CEO however he saw fit. This is manna from heaven for a narcissist. Complete autonomy. No checks, no balances, no restriction on what he wanted to do, no shackles on his application of control. This meant that he essentially engaged in a blatant international sex trafficking and abuse of prospective Abercrombie models. In exchange for providing the position of power and unfettered access to corporate funds necessary for him to sexually terrorize aspiring male models, it suggested that Abercrombie knowingly benefited from Jeffries and his sex trafficking operation, including the value that Jeffries brought to the brand. In other words, Abercrombie didn't give a shit what he did so long as he delivered. How many times have you come across that? It's known essentially as the halo principle, which means that because somebody is viewed as so good at something, all other flaws are overlooked. All other problems are ignored because the focus is on this one thing that they deliver. And if here it is profitability and financial success, then everything else gets overlooked. As the CEO of Abercrombie, Jeffries had modelling scouts scouring the internet and various other resources to identify attractive young men seeking to be the next face of Abercrombie. So he had people within a coterie looking for potential victims. The modelling scout would typically require the hopeful young model to meet with him first during initial casting. If the modelling scout saw potential in the young model, he would be invited to attend a casting at the palatial home of Michael Jeffries, the well-known CEO of the Abercrombie band, with his partner, Matthew Smith. Now, that demonstrates a lack of boundary recognition because Mr. Smith isn't involved in the business, but he's getting involved in these interviews. Furthermore, it might be argued that it'd be a little bit unusual for a CEO to be involved in the recruitment of models, that would be the preserve of somebody down the management food chain. Often, these prospective models turned sex trafficking victims were later sent to other places, including New York, Morocco, England and France, to be sexually abused by Jeffries and other men under Jeffries' control, under the guise of becoming the next Abercrombie model. Thus, it wasn't just the case that it happened in the United States, but it would be sent to other countries, demonstrating the control that was had over these individuals and the trafficking aspect of all of this. Prior to his arrival at the Jeffries casting, the model was often provided with Abercrombie brand clothing that he was required to wear to the event. An Abercrombie gift card would be left at an Abercrombie store for the model to pick up and purchase the required clothing. Consistent with other modelling interviews in the industry, the prospective model was also provided with a detailed call sheet, inclusive of prepaid travel arrangements that had been made for him by the modelling scout from his location to take him to the home of the Abercrombie CEO at his Hamptons estate in New York. Again, having these models turn up at the home is also demonstrating an abuse of power, a sense of entitlement, and a lack of boundary recognition. First of all, query, should the CEO be involved in this? Secondly, why wasn't it taking place at corporate headquarters? All the men in attendance at Jeffries' home were dressed in Abercrombie attire, including the other models, the apparent security staff, as well as Jeffries and his longtime partner, Matthew Smith. Each model was initially led into Jeffries' home and taken to interview with Jeffries, after which each of the prospective models was forced to strip down, humiliation, lack of boundary control, boundary recognition, so that Jeffries could view his body. Now, that, of course, isn't uncommon in model interviews. Nevertheless, The fact that it's being done by the CEO is a boundary recognition issue. After this portion of the interview and casting, the models were made to sign documents described to them as non-disclosure agreements. Thus, that's the enforcement of control over them. They were then taken into rooms where men were engaging in having sex with one another. Each of the models were then forced to take drugs and to participate in sex acts with Jeffries and others, including Smith, all at Jeffries' direction. That, of course, is sexual abuse. It shows a lack of emotional empathy. Again, a lack of boundary recognition, not only in the physical and sexual abuse, but the very fact that it's meant to be an interview, a modelling casting call, and instead it turns into sexual abuse. The models were led to believe that being sexually abused by the CEO of Abercrombie and his partner at a remote private location arranged by the company was the price that was paid to obtain one of the most coveted roles in the industry, an Abercrombie model. This Hollywood sickness of exploiting individuals by basically saying to them, you have to do this if you want to become that, is an act that is well known and has happened in many industries. As I mentioned earlier, it is akin to the casting couch, but it happens regularly in certain industries, some more common than others, particularly those which are more glamorous and linked to entertainment. It's similar with P. Diddy, whereby many of his victims, not all, but many, were induced on the basis of thinking that they were going to get some kind of introduction into the music industry. And therefore, that caused them to have an interaction with P. Diddy and thereafter go along against their wishes with the abuse, because they thought that if they didn't, they would essentially become blacklisted so that they wouldn't be able to achieve their aim. They felt that they had no choice but to go along with what P. Diddy wanted. And it's similar here. And this happens regularly in lots of different industries. In the financial industry, within banking, it occurs within the entertainment industry. There are many instances of individuals, often narcissists, who take advantage of the power imbalance to offer something to somebody, but there is a price to be paid by them, invariably having to engage in something, often a sexual act. Accordingly, this is what went on, and David Bradbury has brought the claim and explained that the acts of sexual abuse and commercial sex acts committed by Jeffries, Smith and certain select individuals took place in Jeffries' New York City mansion, his home in the Hamptons, as well as London, in England, Marrakesh, Morocco, Nice, France, and elsewhere. Jeffries used his New York City and Hamptons mansions to harbour his victims, isolation and manipulation, and as a base from which to transport them to other locations outside of New York and from which he operated, with Abercrombie's cooperation and participation, essentially a massive sex trafficking operation. Bradbury is the lead plaintiff in the claim, but there are many other men believed to exceed 100 victims who are similarly situated to David Bradbury. Some or all of those men use a pseudonym. This demonstrates the scale of the activity that Jeffries has allegedly engaged in, the scope of the operation, and reinforces how it wasn't simply a one-off incident, but rather an orchestrated campaign of utilising his position of power and wealth and abuse that to then go on and commit acts of abuse against individuals. Jeffries served as CEO of Abercrombie from February 1992 through 2014 and is named as a defendant. His longtime partner, Matthew Smith, is also a defendant, and he was allowed by Abercrombie to work extensively with the brand despite not holding any official position within the company. Accordingly, those two individuals, along with Jeffrey's family office, which is an LLC, which conducted business in terms of interstate and foreign commerce and thus found itself a defendant also. The Abercrombie sex trafficking venture operated as a sex-themed company designed to sexually exploit and abuse vulnerable young men and falsely cause them to believe that they would become professional models for one of the world's most popular and successful clothing brands if they succumbed to the sexual abuse of Mike Jeffries, the CEO of the company. Promised gain. Application of sexual abuse. Lack of boundary recognition. Absence of emotional empathy. Jeffries and his co-conspirators preached the importance of the all-powerful Jeffries to cause young models to succumb to the sexual abuse and believe it was a normal and necessary step to becoming an Abercrombie model. Now, ordinarily, a person would think, hang on a second, that's not right. I don't want part of this. But this is the way that a narcissist conditions you. In some instances, it's just a conditioning on a one-on-one basis that takes place between the narcissist as they groom you and draw you into their clutches as part of an intimate personal relationship. But here, this was done repeatedly and systematically in order to cause those individuals to think that this was normal, to treat them like a commodity, to have them succumb by thinking, well, you've got to do what you've got to do. And therefore, this, in a way, is a form of mind control by the narcissist by causing not one, but several victims to believe that this activity was normal. It's similar in the way that a narcissist might abuse a child, causing them to believe that this activity is normal. It results in the individual losing their agency. It results in them becoming more compliant and is an act driven by the narcissism to make that control all the easier. Once in Jeffrey's clutches, each victim knew that he must be completely compliant with every demand Jeffries had for him. Again, this is exactly what a narcissist wants. Getting someone so that they basically become programmed to obey. There is no resistance. There is no questioning. They understand this is what they must do. They had to comply with every demand. Otherwise, the individual would suffer serious reputational, financial, and psychological harm. By using these and other means of force, threats of force, fraud, threats of abuse of the legal process, and coercion, Jeffries and his co-conspirators sexually trafficked and sexually abused David Bradbury and many others. Prior to working for Abercrombie, Jeffries was the president of Alcott & Andrews, a women's retail chain that filed for bankruptcy in 1989. In 1996, Abercrombie became a publicly traded company. From 1996 until 2008, Abercrombie performed exceedingly well, with steady growth in earnings and share price. What Jeffries did, in keeping with his mindset, was to sexualize Abercrombie and Fitch, not only driving his own particular wants and desires into the company, treating it as his own personal plaything, i.e. an extension of him, but he did so by creating a culture whereby such behaviours were seen as the very fabric of the company. He brought famed photographer and fellow sexual abuser Bruce Weber into the fold. Weber has been accused of sexually assaulting more than 20 current and former models who claimed that he engaged in unnecessary nudity and coercive sexual behaviour during professional modelling shoots. By 2003, under the direction of Wexner and Jeffries, the over-sexualization of the brand was speaking for itself. Jeffries was hired by Wexner to invigorate Abercrombie and is considered to have been the main creator of the new look for the company, saying that he wanted Abercrombie to sizzle with sex. While Jeffries was the CEO, and in charge of Abercrombie's methods for recruiting models and expanding the brand. Wexner was always his glorified boss and mentor. While working on behalf of Abercrombie, Jeffries, while at the helm of Abercrombie, supported events where young male models were sexually abused. Jeffries had a system of recruitment where he hired a middleman, a lieutenant, to recruit victims with the prospect of becoming a model for the company. The company financially rewarded Jeffries for his methods of recruiting new models, which then encouraged him further, and essentially, so long as Abercrombie benefited financially, Jeffries was allowed to do whatever he wanted to do. Jeffries wanted to keep pushing the sexual envelope to keep the company's edge over the competition and set Abercrombie apart. As a consequence of his sexually charged ideas, which included sex trafficking and abusive young models, Jeffries was handsomely rewarded. In 2004, he made approximately $25 million with a stay bonus of $6 million. In 2006, he gave an interview to Salon, admitting that the Abercrombie image was built around sex appeal. He stated, "We hire good-looking people in our stores because good-looking people attract other good-looking people, and we want to market to cool, good-looking people. We don't market to anyone other than that." And of course, it's rather entertaining, or rather ironic, that if you look at Jeffries, he's not exactly an oil painting himself. And yet, that doesn't matter for this particular type of narcissist, because he was able to gain what he wanted. And he was given free rein to do so, because so long as Abercrombie succeeded financially, nobody was reining in his behaviour. I'll pause there in respect of this analysis before we move on to some of the greater details of what actually happened to David Bradbury and others. And as I continue to explain to you the nature of these behaviours and how they link to Jeffries' narcissism. Look out for that coming presently. I'm H.G. Tudor. Thank you for listening.